Okay, thank you so much for coming along today. What we're doing is we're sharing our key learnings from the mackerel fishing project that we've been doing. So I want to take you back to the beginning of March or mid-March, and where the lockdown had happened. And to be honest, it felt for me like things I had dreaded happened overnight. There was a complete evaporation of all the business, all new business. I lost 65% of my business in total. But the most bizarre thing was that I felt okay. So even the thing that I'd ultimately feared all my working life had happened, I was okay. And at the time, it was like time stood still and the world had virtually retreated beyond its front doors, and I felt like I was a living part of history. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I don't think, I haven't ever been had the experience of a war or something like this, these commonplace things. So I wanted to, as a researcher, I wanted to understand. I thought, well, I could do some research, especially given that my business had been blown to shreds. So I thought it would be interesting to see what was the impact on these things, what was the impact on leaders, and particularly leaders for me, because I feel that knowing so many of them is that there's a chance that we could be a catalyst for changes in the world, to make the world a better place. And what might those be? So I was in contact with Danny, who's running the webinar with me. She'd been furloughed from one of my clients, P&O Ferries, and so I started chatting with her about how that I had this idea of basically researching leaders, and she said, because she had plenty of time, I'm in. So off we went on the project. But why the name? Well, like all good research projects, you start at A, you think you're going to B, and it very rarely ends up like that. And so where we started was, I thought it would be really interesting to see at what point would the metaphorical tide change? When would business come back? And I thought that if we had a community where we were collectively looking at that, we could all be ready for when the fish came back in. And I was telling a girlfriend about this idea of this project, and she said, "Oh, you mean like mackerel fishing?" And I thought, oh my God, that's a great title for the project, especially because we were looking for something that would hook people in. So mackerel fishing started, and today what we're going to do is spend 35 minutes with you, sharing the insights that we've gained over the last 20 weeks. And then we want to, I suppose we're perceiving this as part of the research. So we're going to share what we've learned, the bigger picture learnings. And then for 25 minutes, we want you to participate in some questions about how you see the insights that we've shared. What we're then going to do is we're going to create a paper that will include a lot more detail about the insights we've gained. And so that you can have a copy of that. So it will be a document describing what we learned. If you have a question, can you leave them to the second half of the webinar? And if you haven't got a pad and paper or whatever, then or even a pen and a paper, then just send it in the chat and we can refer to those questions at the end. So just by way of background, it's all my friends here, so I don't really need to introduce myself, but Danny most certainly does.
Okay, so hi, my name's Danny. I'm an organisational psychologist, and I've been working with Helen over the time that I've been furloughed, like she was saying. I've worked with various different companies, such as the Met Police, the Behavioural Insights in London, and some universities, such as the University of Kent, on like a whole different range of projects. I'm a member of the British Psychological Society as an organisational psychologist on there, which basically means that I can go into workplaces and I can run various different projects to do with like motivation, experience, things like that. Yeah, and so I was furloughed in March, the end of March, and then Helen called me one day and she was like, "Hey, I've got this crazy idea, do you want to join?" And I was like, Totally. Absolutely. And yes, and then we've been working on that since.
Okay, so thanks, Danny. So I've just to remind all of you about how old I am. I have a 30-year career in hospitality, mainly as a researcher and advisor, and I had my own multi-site restaurant business with a partner for 12 years. And I set up Aviatrix in 2012, and we're a boutique slash small strategic market research agency. And what we're interested in doing is bringing clarity to issues and problems so our clients can create profitable strategic change. And just a quick flash on the kind of companies that we work with, that gives you some background. So what we want to do is introduce you to some of the information about the project.
Brilliant. Okay, so our community was made of 72 leaders around 50 different industries with a whole range of experiences and stories that they wanted to share. So these ranged from transport to design to education to like local government, engineering and even film. We recruited those in management positions or higher, with the highest percentage of them being a managing director or a CEO of their organisation. And we focused on leaders that believed that they were the most influential members of society at this time. And I was just wondering, do you think we're right? In late April, we conducted our preliminary survey, which asked, do you believe that you have had the COVID virus? We asked this as we thought that this may influence the leaders' engagement inside the community. And interestingly, 20% of our leaders actually believe that they had previously contracted the virus, but none of them had been tested for it. And with the introduction of the track and trace system and the availability of tests, which are now like around that you can just go and book for, it's been brought to our attention that maybe further study into this kind of thing and the impact it has on leaders in an emotional state may be worth investing in. Okay, so back to the research. We have asked 88 qualitative questions on the community over the last 20 weeks, which basically means that leaders were able to answer with the freedom to disclose as much or as little information as they felt like. And these questions were provided by the leadership community, and they covered topics such as furlough, revenue, continuity planning, or just simply like freaking out over the latest government decisions. We asked 10 pulse behavioural indicators periodically to gain an understanding of how leaders were feeling over the course of the research. But I'll come back to this a bit later. For their time and effort, we provided a report that not only collated all of the answers for the questions, but also gave strategic action points and executive insight into that week's top trending themes. Now, when I say that talking about ourselves is not new news, what I mean is that we devote about 30 to 40% of all speech talking about ourselves. And online, that number jumps to about 80% in the context of the community platform. And online, we have the time to construct and refine what we want to say. Sharing that information is an impulse that we're hardwired with. Just the thought of sharing activates our brain reward centers, even before we've even decided what we wanted to say. And now I'm not going to lie, there were conversations that were taken offline, and leaders who were not part of the community also contributed to these reports. However, doing this, we were able to seek clarity and validation from a whole range of new industries. So the community page actually acts as a communication vehicle for mutually beneficial connections to thrive in. And leaders were able to build upon their existing network and grew in confidence and motivation when others responded positively to their engagement within the community. So we do this like generally as humans because we want to maintain these relationships, and especially during lockdown as well, when these relationships that we relied on like person to person weren't there anymore. We were trying to grab with whatever we can at that point. So we find comfort in others' insights and we add value to that relationship, and it enforces that closeness that we weren't able to get from that face-to-face communication. So we created a give and take effect where we feel obliged to give back to people who had given to us. So kind of imagine that, like having someone else support that crazy idea that you had at 3 a.m. this morning, and realize that it's not actually so crazy and it might just about work. But this time you have a whole network of support who are able to collectively evaluate your ideas and talk over those weaknesses and create a fully holistic plan for you to present your idea to your boss. But for those of you who are like me and prefer solid evidence in numbers to validate findings in real life events, oh, could you?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Like, just take a look at a few of these headlines that completely reflect our leadership insights. So the community were able to tell us these highlights before any headline was published. And this collective brainstorm considered economic, political, demographic, social, cultural, business, and technological trends before it even hit the media.
Brilliant. So, what we've learnt? Well, we've learnt. So, are we okay? Okay, so what we've learnt is the 3 keys to success in the pandemic, or adapting to change. So just looking at the bigger picture, what are our learnings that we've taken from this? So the first thing is the community. You need a community, and we all have communities. We have communities of colleagues, we have, or your team, you have your suppliers, your competitors even, your customers, and then your fellow business leaders, and who you can use to help and support all aspects of your world. Now, what happened within this community is, especially because we made it anonymous and people were feeling vulnerable, people could come into the community and kind of share things. And also the way that we gathered their questions, they could ask for the silly question or what they might consider to be a stupid question, so then we could ask on their behalf within the community. But community is so important, because there's no communication if you don't have people to talk to. So we really witnessed how much people were going to their community and figuring out, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? Just like Danny and I had that conversation, and then we ended up doing this project. So, and the communication, what was all amazing at the beginning was the extent to which people were getting such a return on the investment in communication. They were discovering things that they didn't know about their team, stuff that customers would be happy with. And at the beginning, which Danny will show you in a second, in terms of the first pulse survey, communication went up to 70%. It's now dwindled to 44%, but people really got to grips with seeing the value in communicating. And the other spin-off from that was really understanding what true delegation was. It was about trusting as well as communicating. And so people were having to delegate and all that kind of stuff. So the next phase of communication is creativity. If you're communicating with people, then you then get insights, you get new insights. And this spurred creativity, and there was a boundless source of this. So rich insights to solve problems, drive the business forward. And these are the things that we were witnessing. Because without that input of your community, without engaging with it, there was all you're doing is recycling old thoughts from the past in your own head and going round and round in circles. So engaging with your community, whichever community you need, led to a boundless supply of these insights. So we say, for example, one of the enormous things about furlough was, how do I do this? How do I bring people off furlough? When do I bring them back off furlough? What does even furlough mean? Is we were able to share all those insights from this community, and people were using it as a guide to having like gatherings when people came back so they felt welcome, making sure that they made the effort to speak to furloughed staff, etc. So it was having an impact, and we could see that.
Okay, so This idea of community being key is significantly exposed within the data. And earlier I mentioned this pulse survey, and Helen's just mentioned it as well, that we had conducted. Well, we measured 10 different emotions over the course of 20 weeks, and we call these our behavioural indicators. These included some general indicators, which you'll see in any kind of engagement survey, like motivation, productivity, and drive. And some of them were intended to measure the impact the pandemic had on our emotions, such as financial confidence, certainty, or even state of mind. And the idea that communication is key is so important that we actually believe that the feeling of active sharing had a direct effect on leaders' behavioural indicators. So these graphs, they suggest that up to week 5, so up to the light purple, there was a general feeling of unease, where the majority of leaders opted for what they knew to be true, and we're calling this their baseline feelings. Between the weeks of 5 and 8, so that's the light purple and the dark purple, our leaders seem to be feeling worse about their situation, with general doom and gloom consuming the media and pretty much all of our minds. Now, all of these seem to be shrinking. All of these, like the sections seem to be shrinking. All of them apart from communication, which seem to prevail in importance. And as week 8 passed, so as the dark purple passed and we keep going on further into the project, the government had released its plans to unlock the nation and provide further financial support for businesses. So we all naturally started to feel a little bit better, and that's the light blue on the graphs. Towards the end of the data collection, so week 20, which is right at the other end, all but one of these behavioural indicators had significantly improved since the start of the research, and that one that didn't improve was communication. And we are finding that ourselves, gaining confidence and reverting back to the old ways of doing things, as if we hadn't learned a thing during this time. And I'm just going to hand you back to Helen now, so she can continue this story, and you can see how you can continue to build back your better.
So what I wanted to share with you is, I suppose we've taken all the reports, we've bored ourselves rigid with reading all 18 of them or whatever it was, and looked at the data and thought, so what does this all mean? Actually, as a leader, what does it mean to me? What have I learned from this? And I've learned shed loads. Actually, this was just a personal project for me in terms of understanding what it is to be a leader. Joking aside, here we go. So the first thing is that I watched a webinar or a podcast, or listened to a podcast or whatever it was a few weeks back. And there was a guy that had had a stroke. He'd lost the use of all his limbs, and he couldn't speak. And he had a decision to make, because he could see that his progress, he was surrounded by people with exactly the same predicament, making the comparison with how they were before. So before they lost whatever faculties they lost, or the use of faculties, they compared themselves with what they were before. And that he saw that as a mistake. So he could see that that would halt his progress. So comparisons were not relevant. So he decided that he would start where he was, and everything from there would be a way forward. So the only comparison that was relevant to him was where he was now, and with himself. The other thing is, I'm going to slightly contradict myself here. He needed to find a community of people, but not people that were bringing him back to that idea of comparing themselves to the past. So all the people on the ward were actively encouraged to bemoan the fact that they didn't have this or that or the other thing. So he completely excluded them. So he put himself in a place where he was, and he could move forward. And that's exactly what we saw in the community, is those businesses where you could forget the past. Yeah, we were this and we were that, and we had this and we had that. Forget that. Where are we now? And we saw that being the absolute unbelievable catalyst for change. So we had examples in the community where an online retailer who could not most of her activity was at trade shows. So she decided she couldn't do trade shows clearly, so she decided she would entertain her customers. So she launched a podcast, which it was something that she wanted to do in the past, and she got tremendous support and encouragement from that. We had an absolute classic of a meat supplier and a potato grower, both of them supplying the catering industry. Overnight, catering industry shut down. The meat supplier thought, right, what can I do? Where am I now? So he decided to do home deliveries. His business has now exponential grown and all the rest of it. The potato supplier, meanwhile, saw, I'm a catering supplier, tried to flog the potatoes that were going rotten in his yard to potato farmers, and the rest went, pig farmers even, and the rest went to rot. The difference in, I am this, I am fixed, this is what I do, forget it. And of course, there is our own story, which is we lost 65% of our business at Aviatrix, so we created a leadership community to share experiences. So there's always things that you can do, and I think the question is, what can I do in this situation? The next one is, as if we didn't know this, fear kills creativity. There are 3 responses to a threat. Not 2, the fight and flight we all know about. The lesser known one, which is the one that's an absolute killer if you're in business, is freeze. None of them are helpful for the creative process. So effective was the communication of fear by the government. I mean, if any politics aside, they did a bloody good job on scaring the living bejesus out of all of us so that we stayed in. That was enormously effective, and it was the world over. But actually, you need to cut yourself off from that if you're going to actually create change, because you can't do it from a position of fear. So some of you described within the community how you'd stop reading the news as a way of managing that input. It had to be managed in order for you to move forward. Because creative thinking requires going beyond the fear into the art of contemplating what is possible. We witnessed so much creativity where people were reworking work processes, returning to a purpose-driven business, which we'll come back to in a sec, and rediscovered new ways to collaborate with people they hadn't even thought possible. As if we didn't know this, if any of us are running a business, but cash is king. If you've got cash, then you're still in the game, and you have to look after it. Now, I remember a quote, which I cannot find for love nor money, which was, I think it was a BA CEO or something, and he said, costs are like weeds in a garden. The second you take your eye off them, they will grow and take over the beautiful plants and seeds you've planted. There were brilliant stories right at the beginning when you furloughed people, and they were discovering all these wasted hours, all these inefficient processes that were not material to the health of the business that they could cut out. Now, before the pandemic started, the government focus in supporting business was to increase productivity, because productivity was a issue in the UK compared to lots of other industrialised places. So what we saw and what we were witnessing was productivity becoming the absolute focus of attention. Lots of sensible pruning of costs, planting of ideas, and better processes to survive and get ready to catch the waves of recovery. So is that office helpful to me or not? Is that member of staff worth their salary, etc.? All those hard questions were able to be explored. So, excuse me, the only time we witnessed words like joy or fun mentioned in the community were when it was described, when people were talking about the context of spontaneity of being with people in the office. So it's not the planned call where you're talking about this, that, the other thing. It was the spontaneous moments of, or seeds of something new where you're just sitting across a desk from somebody else. Whilst there are, I mean, unbelievably brilliant ways of communicating, we all appreciate now Zoom and all the rest of it. For goodness sake, we wouldn't be here without it. There are, and that we have been put into a live work experiment where we've all been working from our homes and using all this virtual technology. The general consensus is that more fun can be had when you're in the company of another human being. Now, I'm going to declare my bias here. I am an extrovert, so I do get my energy from others. And I can get my energy from others within a virtual call, but there is so much value of people being with each other. And I think moving forward, the biggest challenge that we've got is figuring out how we can do that. When is face-to-face the right thing to do, and when is virtual the right thing to do? And we definitely have choice, but we must use our energy wisely, which brings me carefully onto the next point. Is looking after yourself. You're the master of you. Nobody else takes responsibility for what you eat, where you go, who you talk to, anything. It's up to you. But if you are stressed out, you need to take time out, because choosing a healthy space in every single moment is our choice, and relating to only what is in front of you rather than what might happen. That was the key. People choosing a healthy space to be so that they could get the perspective that they needed to make good decisions. We have seen so many examples during the lockdown and the pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, where people have made really crappy decisions. They've just made a decision because they're stressed, they're under pressure, and then they've made a decision that wasn't good. When you come at things from a healthy space, then you're much better chance of making a good decision. And we all know that working from a sense of purpose makes life effortless, joyful, and energizing. We saw leaders go back to, why on earth did I set this business up? What was it that motivated me? Why on earth did I take this job that I've grown to hate? Let me go back and rediscover what it was that got me here in the first place. And we saw that, because I think that's the other thing that we learned early on in those first few weeks, was the reflection on how bloody miserable we'd all been with what we were doing. And actually, we witnessed the investment in creating more balance with the self and our work in the first half of the project. People going on dog walks even, time with the family, new fitness regimes. And as we came to July, what did we see? Old habits come back, not those things. So the question I would like to leave with you on this particular page is, if you needed saving brain surgery, and you had the choice of two brain surgeons, both with exactly the same results, but one is stressed out, working, overworked surgeon who never returns your calls, and you're sure he's not listening to you when he does speak to you? Or are you going to choose the one that returns your calls, works regular hours, is calm, and when you talk to him, he is really listening to you? So it is to all our advantage, mostly our own health, which is why you should choose a healthy space when you're not feeling great. And we know what that feels like. It's an undeniable fact. So the next one is, this is your life, you need to live it. What, again, we witnessed in the community is you can choose to be in your head. What does that mean? Well, it means mulling over all the scenarios, fearing all the consequences, reconfiguring all your figures backwards, forwards, all over the place. But unless you get stuck in and give it a go, magic does not happen. Magic happens when we move. Leading should be fun. It should be inspiring to others, and it should be joyful. That's why we all do it. So if you feel like do the podcast, deal with the complaining customer that keeps you awake at night. ask the colleague to collaborate, sack the unproductive person, apply for that grant, or pivot, whatever the hell that meant when everybody was banging on about that. So doing is living and creating possibilities. Go back to my circles, go to your community, make yourself vulnerable, speak to them, create stuff. Thinking is living. Thinking, staying in your head, is living a virtual reality of your own life. It's not got any of the richness that we can get from actually getting stuck in and living. But change is hard. And I think this last point really is, through the unknown, it's only when you get to the point where you really don't know, where you've had the stroke, you've lost the use of your voice and your limbs. By the way, you made a full recovery in 12 months. It's only when you get to that point that the only thing that emerges is hope. And hope has everything that we need to be creative and move on. So in terms of where we go from here, what we're looking at doing next. So mackerel fishing for us was all about sharing, learning and growing, and we feel that was something that we witnessed happened. What we're looking at doing, we've seen it as a kind of pilot. Can this work? And it's obviously worked through the pandemic. But we know that we need to increase the membership. We know it needs to be more industry focused. So more focus on maybe, hospitality industry, so there's pockets of people you can share with. And also, but we need leadership engagement, and we need your questions, because the whole thing is a perfect circle where you decide what's on your mind, you give us the question, we put it in the community, you then get the answers, and so it goes on. But we're going to need to collectively move this forward if we're going to make it happen. So we would like to continue this beyond the pilot, because we do feel that we've created a community that we feel has been enormously beneficial to people, which we've had the feedback on. The other thing is, we've created a methodology. I thought, and certainly Danny did at the beginning, that the bribe for people, we wanted you to all fill in weekly surveys. That was our original idea. And then the community was something that we kind of like, was our give back. So we would give you the community. But what actually happened was, it was completely different. The community became the source of all the insight. And of course, the pulse surveys went on alongside. So, but it's a really good methodology. And the reasons why, the anonymous contribution that people were able to make meant that even if you were on your knees in terms of not feeling great that day, you could still make a contribution. And it's relevant to every community group. Being able to ask other people about your vulnerable questions, that is so important. And objective analysis. Now, I'm going to sing our own praises here, but actually the problem, everybody can do market research, and everybody does. They ask people questions, do a bit of a survey monkey or whatever it's called. But it's the objective analysis that makes the research meaningful and makes it be a catalyst for change. And that is what this is all about. And it also allowed for different levels of contribution. Okay, so we had 70 people that were in the community. How many of them contributed? 20, 25? But I see, having spoken to those people that didn't contribute, they also derived a benefit, and their participation is really important, because as a voyeur looking in the community or reading the reports, we are creating change for them too. And I've witnessed that over and over again. Why don't you contribute? Well, yeah, but I like seeing what people are saying. It's helping me, see through my own processes. So there is a value to that. So I see all levels of communication, even if you only read the report, as an extremely valuable contribution to the process. And finally, hope you like the logo. So we're also looking at creating, or we have created a disruptor model. So simulating the impact of the pandemic, because those 7 things that we learned are things that never ever going to change. Those are the things that create sustainable change. And for goodness sake, every client that asks me to go and do research for their business wants change. They want something to shift. And what we're saying is that through this experience, we can see that we've come up with a model so that we can look at customers, we can look at the team, we can look at the leaders within the organisation. We're also doing some work with using systemic organisational constellations, where you can create a situation to move where you're not shifting. You've got all the information to do it, but you're not shifting. Why not? So that will be part of this this process. And using the hindsight of 2020 to help you build better, not build the same, build better, and drive out of the hole in a different way. Insight-driven actions in an executive summary, and being comfortable, getting people comfortable with the feeling of perpetual change. That is what that model is about. So we wanted to put, the floor is yours. I think a round of applause for me that it's only 36 minutes actually, which was 1 minute over. So the questions that we had, we've got some questions for you, but if there's questions that you immediately know that you have, we'd love to hear them. Now. So we have one.
I've got a question.
Yes, Lou.
So the next big thing, although COVID continues, so the next big thing that's going to impact businesses and might not be quite so much of a psychological impact, but certainly on a physiological impact, will be the transition on the 31st of December. And as you know, Coast Capital are doing quite a lot. Well, we've just started doing questionnaires amongst our business community about their readiness for some of the enormous impact that the customs and whether it's a deal or no deal is going to have on their business. I wondered whether, you know, mackerel fishing or your community of 70 people would be an interesting way of gathering some information about that impact, not just the sort of factual stuff, but actually what I liked about this, the sort of emotional, psychological impact that all of this is having. I mean, COVID followed by transition is, well, some people go mad.
I couldn't agree with you more, Lou. I mean, yeah, we definitely see that as a major part of what we would focus on next within the community. I think Danny and I have just decided that we're going to do it anyway. Obviously subject to having some leaders in there. It'll just be me and her talking. But I think definitely, and I suppose it is the next storm on our horizon that we need to be ready for.
Sorry to grab the attention, but would there be a way, because we're putting our, I hope you're all coming to the AGM tomorrow, on Thursday, but there's some very interesting moves that the Coastal Capital LEP and the Growth Hub are moving towards to try to help the recovery of our region. I just wondered whether Helen and Danielle, brilliant presentation by the way, you'd be prepared to do a little presentation, especially as it's so short, Helen, to some of the senior team in the LEP, because I think some of those insights are really, really powerful.
No, definitely, we'd love to.
Okay, cool.
Great.
I'll shut up now.
No. I just had one more thing onto that, if that's okay. So we have actually been asking some of the Brexit questions on the community so far, and a lot of the response we've had at the moment has been kind of the same as we started the mackerel fishing project. Is we knew about the virus. We've known about it. We had known about it since it was televised in December last year, but none of us thought it was going to happen. And then come March, it was a total shock, and we felt like the tide had like washed away everything. We had to start from scratch. Now this time we actually have some warning that Brexit will happen, albeit we don't know on what grounds yet. So at the moment it's starting to feel like in the community we're at the same as when we first started researching all of this. So actually it would be a really great time to start looking at the whole Brexit situation like now that I'm not saying that we've gone past the pandemic, because obviously we're still in it. There's a lot of things that should still coming up, but but actually now would be a really great time, so thank you.
I'll take that offline with the two of you.
Okay.
You know, give us everybody else a chance to talk.
Okay, no, that's great, Luke. Any other questions? Yes, Sam.
Hello. I had a conversation with a recruitment consultant recently who said that they were basically putting the businesses that they worked into kind of 3 groups depending on where they were in dealing with the pandemic, and they called those 3 groups triage, stabilization and recovery. And obviously for some businesses like tourism, particularly a really good one, they're still in triage. You know, the world is still upside down for them, and very, very few of them have been able to even move to stabilization yet. For other businesses, like a bit of the hospitality, quite a lot of the hospitality sector, they're more into the stabilization, slow recovery phase. And I just wondered, with the work that you've done, have you had enough insights by sector to look at anything like that and to see whether some of the findings that you had were applied differently depending on which sector of business people were working in?
We haven't had the volume of people within each of those markets to be able to do that. However, what I think is interesting, knowing, because personally knowing quite a few of the contributors and knowing how they were impacted, is that didn't seem to have an impact. Those that were not for 6 sorted out their mindset and moved forward and have created all kinds of really, really amazing stuff. But I think that I think it goes. It's rather like that. Back to the stroke analogy, really. If you're hanging out with people that are just being really kind of like, say, the what's that? I can never remember sayings, but you know, the ones that just churn over the old, you know, chew over the old cud or whatever, is you're not going to get anywhere new. And I think what I suppose, but I know that the feedback from our leaders has been, if this continues, I would like it if you could do exactly what you said, which is to split it by sector.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing this lady was saying was that a lot of senior management teams are looking at their leadership teams, either below them or alongside them, and saying, actually, you know what, we don't have, or we have leaders who don't have the right level of emotional intelligence to deal with what's happening. So there's a segment of management that sort of sit there in their corner office and wait for people to come with them with their problems to sort out, and they're very reactive. Yeah. And in this new world where everyone's virtual and everyone's got other priorities other than work that they need to deal with in their lives, whether that's homeschooling or people who've got COVID or whatever, they've got to be able to factor that into the workday, and they've never been able to do that before. And so what has also come out of this for a lot of senior leadership teams, and as they go into a recruitment process, is we need people who are better placed to have that level of emotional intelligence and that better virtual management of people, and putting people at the centre of it rather than putting work at the centre of it. And I think that's quite a diametric shift in a management approach, and I really hope that doesn't get lost. A great presentation as well, by the way, but that thought of not dropping this new learning, I think is really absolutely critical.
Well, I think that is what mackerel fishing needs to become, the home of that kind of, positive thinking. What's the point? What is the point in sitting around moaning about stuff? I mean, we've got to move forward and we've got to make the world a better place. I know that sounds a bit grandiose, but I think what we were observing with leaders was that actually, you know, Emily, who turns up in the office, hopefully there's no Emily's on the call, Emily, who turns up to the office and is a bit bloody miserable, keeps moaning, you know, actually, I'm really sorry, Emily, there's no place for you here, you know? And I know that that might be extreme and slightly ruthless and all kinds of other things, but actually the mindset is the thing that is so absolutely critical. And just opening up your mind and remembering, you know, just all the things we know intuitively and innately, remembering those things, what makes us healthy in the world. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Sam. Any other questions?
So what's the next step then in terms of this community? How are you mentioned earlier that you had people who weren't engaging, they were viewing, you know, kind of more passively than actively. So have you got any plans to try and get them more engaged?
Yeah, we had a go at that, and we could make a more concerted effort on that. And yeah, I think if we're, because our plan was originally to see this through. We thought it would be to the end of the summer, but obviously this is dragging on. I think that's the other thing that we thought. We believed in the myth that this would be over after a few months, and it's not. So I think that we wanted to book this in, so we had this as a line in the sand and then decide how we're going forward. And I think that that is something. But I think you can get really disheartened in a situation with a community where people aren't contributing, and they're just not going to. It takes quite a lot of courage to respond to one of the questions. And once you've done it once, you then see the return on your investment in writing the question. We had leaders talking about how they really enjoyed answering the questions when they could find the time, enjoyed answering the questions because they realised how far they'd come or what their learnings were. So that reflective time enabled them to really get something for themselves. So I think that we'd have to spend some time kind of talking about that, because I don't think it's, and people saying, oh, I don't really have anything to say about that, when of course everybody has something to say about it. So, but I think the big thing is getting more people on it.
Were they anonymous, by the way? Sorry if I missed that.
Yeah, we set it up so you could be anonymous. Some people chose not to be or didn't read the thing. So we had all kinds of different authors, etc., and silly names on there. So you didn't, you know, if you wanted to say my business has been wiped out without feeling vulnerable, you could do that, which was a really, really good idea in terms of contributing. So I think more of that, really.
I really think that the next stage of the next storms that we're going to encounter, albeit Brexit or something that will happen next year, I'm sure there will be something that happens next year. I really do believe in this kind of community, because the feedback that we've got periodically throughout this from all of the leaders on the community really have been that the advice and the engagement and everything that it had encountered, and giving them the platform to be able to talk to each other about this in a really safe location, like whether you are a manager, like a middle manager, or like a CEO of the company who doesn't really know what decision to make next, it's always been a really great platform for leaders to just contact other people and say, look, I know you've been in this position, this is what I think is going to happen. Have you got any advice on that? And it's a really, just, I think it's a really amazing platform to be able to do this on.
Could I just jump in really quickly? It's not necessarily with a question, but as a member of that community, I just want to really validate everything that you have spoken about in this presentation. I personally have found it incredibly beneficial. You know, it is quite lonely as a leader, and particularly when you're in a position where you almost need to take ownership for how your team is feeling. I found it enormously beneficial to me, and gaining an external viewpoint of my organization to be a member of this community. And all of the kind of insights you've presented today really do match up with my own insights and my own experiences as a member of this community. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you. It was a really great presentation, and it has been very rewarding being part of mackerel fishing.
Thanks,
Oh,
Liam.
thank you so much.
So just spinning off Liam's point is, if none of you have got any questions, then I've got questions for you. So how do your experience, given that what we've shared with you, how do your experiences actually compare to the ones we've shared?
Do you want me to just kind of add on to what I just said? Yeah, so I think for me, I feel like lockdown has obviously presented a lot of challenges for our organization, kind of our funding is halved. But I also think there's been a lot of positives. And I feel that kind of having that physical separation from being in the office environment and, physically being away from the business has given me an opportunity to take an almost external viewpoint of the organization and to identify, some key areas in which we could improve, some key areas of innovation, some key things that we could do kind of going forward. And I don't think I would have necessarily had that opportunity had it have been business as usual and kind of, being pulled in so many different directions in an office environment. And so I feel that there's been a lot of positives as well as negatives. I would say mostly negative, but there are some good things that have come from it as well.
No, completely. I think what you're saying about you've that distance that has been naturally or forced on us by not having the office environment and having to come back and have a look. That absolute space of reflection has been so enormous, and I suppose I just feel that is the thing that is missing from the normal working life, the space to think, to reflect, which, if nothing else, if just answering the odd question in a virtual community like mackerel fishing, if that gives you, if we're able to come up with the question to stimulate that kind of reflection time, then that has done an amazing job, quite frankly. Any other thoughts on that?
I'd just like to endorse that. One of the findings that you had, the most interesting thing is that, people in the physical space, you'd think they'd have better connections with their teams, but actually what transpired was the virtual environment actually forced them to get to know their teams much better. And there are some fantastically strong relationships that have been built out of the lockdown scenario. And we've seen it in the alumni escalator program. People have commented. They've also noticed that people who are not effective, and they've had the courage to say, we don't need people like you in our team anymore. So, everything that I've seen and experienced has really underpinned everything that you've uncovered in the research that you've been doing. And I think it will be incredibly useful to talk to you. I am going to talk to you very soon after this.
Brilliant, Lou. Okay, any other reflections? Because I've got, in terms of, well, I'll ask you my next question. What do you see is key to making a positive change in the world through our collective leadership? So what do you see is key to making a positive change in the world through our collective leadership? Any comments on that?
I'd just like to say it's absolutely is community, absolutely community. Everything else is roll off from there. The work that I've been doing during this lockdown mirrors yours completely. I'm just sitting, I'm watching, I'm going, whoa. You guys are doing exactly the same as me. There's something in the air that I think is floating around. A lot of ideas have been floating around for an awful long time, that it was business as usual. We knew they were good ideas, but nobody ever did anything. And when it came to it, I mean, one of the first things that I discovered was, rediscovered, was Kubler-Ross curve. You guys, that thing you just described was a Kubler-Ross curve. And and so I took that out to my clients, did stuff, and they said, oh, that's too weird and complicated. And so I had to go back and try to get some other models, working for different clients, also doing research and saying, you know, people are just, they're gagging for change. And the kind of change they're looking for is emotional, and the way they put it, it's got to be a fair. So, you know, my job has been unpacking fair all summer long. But, you know, when I looked at your stuff, Helen, you got it in 36 minutes, man. I could talk for days. where you got to in 36 minutes. It's fantastic. But the basic thing, your model, you know, the creativity is the result of having the community and being able to communicate and, you know, sharing those ideas. So creativity, you don't teach creativity, creativity emerges. And, you know, the implications not only for organizations, but for governments is huge. And some of my stuff is with local government and national government. So I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you as quick as possible. Because I want to get you into those people. So
Brilliant, thank you, Pat.
Just I'm going to shut up now.
Any other things about making a positive change? Okay.
Hi, Helen. Oh, it's Luke, actually. Sorry, I haven't got the video on because I'm at home because a child's got a temperature. So we're all self-isolating. Yeah, it's interesting that I've actually forgotten the question I was going to say, but but I think it's do you find, I mean, with the research that's come out, what you found is that, do you think there's like a bandwagon effect though that's happening as well? So, you know, I know we're all change, but what's happening is people are then making, you know, extrapolating short-term, extrapolating long-term decisions from very short-term emergency actions, and that necessarily isn't a good thing for business or for long-term stability. So, you know, when we look at some of the businesses that have survived previous recessions and crises, did they completely pivot and change their way of working in the way that people have started to talk about now? And I suppose it's a question of, do, you know, as I say, as a longer term research piece, is that actually is to monitor those agencies and those businesses that have taken drastic action, and to work out whether it was or was not the right thing to do. So, you know, if we're living in a completely changed world, and the world doesn't go back to normal, then perhaps it was the right thing to do. But, you know, or do we feel that the world will go back to normal, and actually then people are left in they're in the brave new world, but we've gone back to the old world? It's just a thought, really, because I think that's, for me, the long term. Yeah, there's a longer term research piece for me in this.
No, I agree with you. What will happen to the, you know, even if we just took what will happen to the people that have been contributing, that I've been waxing lyrical about how amazing they are, you know, and I think that making short-term plans, we have to survive today. And I think what all the keys are is that, you know, you have to get, you know, today there is only this moment, you know, that you can deal with, and what life will unfold from there. If you don't pay attention in this moment, if you don't live that moment, then there isn't another moment. You know, you know, if you put it off, you know, there is no future, really. So I think that it's dealing with what's in front of your nose and making the best possible decision you can make, and then life will unfold. But if you're not paying attention, and I think that for me is the most enormous thing, if you're not paying attention to what is, if you're not listening to your customers, if you're not truly listening to your members of the team, then you are likely to make a mistake. And so, or you're kind of like, you've got this idea of what the scenario is, but you're not actually paying attention to what's going on. So I think that it's finding that careful balance. And for me, the only time I get out of that space is when I'm fretting, when I'm stressing, when I'm full of fear, when I'm worrying about how I'm going to get something done. It doesn't happen to me when I'm in, found the space to be me. So I don't know if I've answered your question in the slightest.
That's okay. I think it's, yeah, for me, it's really interesting. I think
We can only do our best, can't we?
Yeah, I think it's yeah. As I said, I think there's a long we've survived. As you said, as the earlier comment was, people have survived, and now into a different phase.
Yeah.
So it's actually it's not survival. You've got through the survival thing, and you've climbed up the mountain or whatever. You're at the top, or you've climbed down, and now now you've got to get down, kind of thing. But the weather's still drawing in. So to mix another analogy with your fishing, mackerel fishing. But,
well, I think that, Luke, that's a really interesting and good place to finish. Is that we do want to help you get down the mountain by having the community that we've created and providing that rich source of insight that will hopefully metaphorically hold your hand as you go down the other side of the hill. And because if there's one thing for sure, we're all in the same situation. This really is a situation that we're all in whatever way it might be. So so we want to provide that. So I'm 1 minute over. I apologise for that. What we're going to do is we're going to pull a report together, which will be equally succinct as this, we hope. And we'll be in touch, because we're going to need all of your help to make the community bigger, and we're going to need all of your help for you to feed us the questions that, using Luke's metaphor yet again, will be all the questions that you need to know how to get down the hill.
Helen, I've been very quiet for the whole hour. It's Andrew here.
Hi.
You just mentioned something which I think is really prevalent, where people don't listen to their clients, customers. I think people talk too much and actually don't listen to what their clients are actually saying. I think that's one of the fundamental issues we have in our industry, in our business.
Yeah, no, totally, Andrew. I completely agree. Lovely to see you.
And you too.
Right, it's totally true. One more thing, it's so I can't get over how important that actually is, because we see so many times, especially before this pandemic, that companies they assume that they know who their customers are, and they think that they know what's best for them, and they don't even talk to them about it. So talk to your team, talk to your customers. They will lead you forward. It's really quite simple.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, well, thank you so very, very much for joining us this lunchtime. We hope you got something from it. Onwards and upwards.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.